G'day guys, Mac with the Circle, and joining me today is Ryan Kimmel from the USA.
What's up?
And we're going to be talking some Battletech today because, well, fuck it, we can. So, Ryan, it's all your fault basically that I'm interested in Battletech. I suppose, first thing to start with, how did you get into Battletech?
So, it's actually the first miniatures game I played. I started playing Battletech before I even got into like GW stuff. And I would say that's probably because at the time, so for one, Battletech it's a United States game. Like, it was created by a person from the United States. So FASA back in the day that created it was like an RPG slash like board game company. So a little bit like the American version of Games Workshop, only smaller. So in America, it was more, prevalent here than it probably was in the rest of the world. So why other people may not have heard of Battletech that early, when you went to a game store here, it was on the shelf. Pretty much every major game store had some Battletech technical readout books and miniatures. Also, it's always been very big in video gaming. If you guys have heard of MechWarrior, so MechWarrior is essentially the digital IP, the video game IP, and Battletech is for the board game and the RPG IP. But they're really it's the same universe, pretty much, like 99% the same. Microsoft currently owns the MechWarrior IP, which we can talk about later, how the IP got kind of split into all these little sub things, and it's caused, a few problems with the game, but it's getting better over time, and right now it's the best it's been in a long time as far as the IP goes, on how it's owned and who can do what and what the legal ramifications of all that was. But anyway, I actually started playing the video game, the original MechWarrior video game, MechWarrior 1, like on a really crappy... My buddy Jacob had it, and one day after school, he's like, hey, you should come over and play this video game with me. And, dude, if you look up MechWarrior 1, I can't even tell you, like, the graphics are, like, probably Atari level. Maybe... they're better than Atari. They're better than Atari, but probably worse than Nintendo.
See, I played MechWarrior 2 growing up. That would have been 1990s, I think. Maybe early 2000s I was playing that. And had no idea this was actually a board game. Because obviously this was early days of internet, so you couldn't just find that shit out by Googling it. Right.
So my buddy Jacob was big into, like, anime. I've never been that big into anime. I've watched some of it, mainly because, like, we were really close, me and him. And he'd watch it, and I'd watch some of it with him. But he was big into anime and also big into video games, and we played MechWarrior stuff together. Some of the original mechs are based 100% directly off of mechs from popular animes. Macross, Dolgrim, I think I'm saying that right. And there was another one. But basically what happened was FASA, originally, the guy who created it in the U.S., liked these the idea of these giant robots in warfare that had been going on in Japan anime for several years already, but he didn't like how they like flew around in space and did all this like outlandish shit. So he wanted to make it more military realistic and put more of like a gritty, grounded, hard sci-fi spin on it. But he also wanted designs that originally that people would immediately recognize from these animes and give them a reason to buy the game and then fall in love with it, afterwards for other reasons. So he basically approached the companies that own these animes and was like, hey, for purposes of only selling it in the U.S. market and basically doing this board game that I'm calling, it was originally called Battle Droids, which he got sued over that too. But anyway, we'll stick on this one for now. He got the okay from these Japanese anime companies to use these designs in the board game. So, like, they call them the unseen. Like, if you Google Battletech unseen, it's the mech designs that were taken from these animes and then used in the Battletech game. Well, later on, that became a problem because this other company called Harmony Gold that got the distribution rights for those cartoons and stuff in the United States then turned around and sued FASA for using the likenesses of these mechs. And it became this big legal thing that only actually got settled last year when it started in the 80s.
Wow, and who says the court system doesn't work?
Yeah, well, it was one of those on-again, off-again things, and if you look up anything about Harmony Gold, they're basically IP trolls in a way. They just sue everybody over everything, and it really flummoxed a lot of things. So, like, people bought these, like, miniatures, and they really liked these certain mechs for Battletech, and a lot of people like me, I didn't even give a fuck about the animes. I didn't even, if nobody would have told me, I wouldn't even have known they were from an anime. I just wanted to play my, Battlemaster or Marauder or whatever, and I couldn't because Harmony Gold threw a hissy fit. So going forward, what Battletech did was they slightly modified the designs to where they have similar aspects to the original ones from the anime, but they do look different enough that they can call them their own. So like that Marauder, the Marauders that you saw in the class, and my Thunderbolt, and that Battlemaster that Matt painted in the class, those are all what's called unseen mechs that were from those animes. And over time, the designs have slowly morphed to where you can still see that they harken back to the original design. Like the weapons are all in a similar place, and they have the same similar outline, but they do look different enough to where I don't really think those companies can bitch anymore, or that one company can bitch anymore.
Makes sense.
And then it changed from Battle Droids. So originally, the game was supposed to be about, they were still giant robots, but they didn't have pilots. They were supposed to be like drones, basically. So like a big robot that was controlled by, a person on the ground, basically, or pre-programmed, almost like the things in Heresy, Automata, where they have a basic set of programs that can then be also semi-controlled by somebody close to them. And they called it Battle Droids. Well, George Lucas got pissed because of Star Wars and droids in Star Wars. So he sent FASA a cease and desist, and the game had only been out for like 6 months, I think. And they ended up just telling him they'd change it, and they changed it to Battletech and put pilots in the big robots. And that's how we got what we got.
Well, at least you got away with something. Well, they got away with something, I should say.
Yeah. Which I actually like the idea of pilots in them better anyway, so I think it worked out for all involved there.
Yeah, no, it's cool.
I know that was
cool that there's people in them.
Yeah. So I know that was a long rambling thing, but we needed to get that out of the way anyway. But essentially, I played the video game because my buddy Jacob introduced me to it, and he was into the animes. And he also, at the time, there wasn't audiobooks or whatever, so he had a few of the Battletech novels, and he was big into the Curetans. So he would always read all this Curetan stuff, and we found out it was a board game or whatever, so he went and bought, I believe it was the second edition version of the Battletech, like, starter box or whatever. It was like in the mid to late 80s. And it had a bunch of, plastic mech models in it, and we played the crap out of that game. And then that actually sort of introduced me to Games Workshop games because of going to the game store and picking up Battletech stuff. We saw the Games Workshop stuff. So it was kind of like, that was my entry into miniatures gaming was Battletech. It was
your gateway drug then.
Yeah.
The plot thickens. Alright, so first things first when it comes to the actual gameplay itself.
Yep.
The rules. Obviously the game's been out since the 80s, and one of the big things we talk about on this channel with Games Workshop is basically they deliberately try to supersede existing designs and existing rules every edition.
Yep.
Battletech does not do this, do they?
No, not at all. They've only had one, what I would consider major rules change since 1983, in that the way essentially the core rules changed, and all it was an adjustment on how to calculate points to make games more even. So none of the core mechanics changed. Like, you still rolled to hit, rolled your location, damage was the same, all the weapon stats were the same, the way movement worked, all of that was the same. Basically what changed was the points system. That was all. That's the only major change since 1983 or whatever, when it's come out.
And for people who are curious about what the rules are like for Battletech, well, first of all, later on we'll show the actual rules themselves or where to get some. But if anyone here is familiar with Adeptus Titanicus, you're probably going to notice a few similarities.
Yeah, very similar. Classic Battletech. So that's the other thing we kind of need to make clear. There are two versions of Battletech. There's Classic and Alpha Strike. So Alpha Strike is and was, whatever, however you want to say it, it's basically, there was a lot of people that were like, we want to play Battletech, but the rules are very old and they're very... I'm saying it from the opinion of these people, not necessarily myself, because I like Classic a lot. They felt that the rules were clunky, needed an update, all this stuff. So the company, instead of just throwing out Classic and saying we're not going to do this anymore, we're going to move on to this new thing, they just made a totally separate rule set called Alpha Strike that was a much more streamlined quick play version, and they just support both at the same time, and you can choose to play either or both.
Yeah, that sounds good to me. So, okay, Battletech itself. So obviously there's different time periods, so give a quick rundown of what the sort of time frames are for the games are set in, and what restrictions that'll have on gameplay for people. Probably a good way, because obviously you don't want people to be doing clan invasion or something at the same time as, I don't know.
Starleague. So
yeah.
Okay, so that's the other thing. So when you said, so they come out with so in 40K or 30K or whatever, how they always come out with new factions or new models or new vehicles or whatever, but the timeline never really, at least until modern 8th edition, I guess 8th editions pushed the timeline forward slightly. But before, it was always this stagnant timeline that they would just randomly come up with new shit somehow. The way Battletech introduces new stuff and new tech is that it's been an ever-expanding timeline since 1983. So in 1983, when the game launched, the timeline of the game was 3025 through 3039. So that is what's called the late Succession War era. So there was these things called Succession Wars that in the Battletech universe start in 2781, and they run all the way through 3049, and there's 4 of them. So the intro to the game originally was during the middle of the 4th Succession War. So they're called the Succession Wars because you used to have this thing called the Star League that was basically this big galactic empire that was ruled by one guy called the First Lord. And then you had all these nation states that were all part of this Star League. Think of the current EU, but imagine if the EU there was one preeminent person that basically could run all of
the EU, yeah. Angela Merkel, the EU, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So imagine if Merkel, though, was had the powers of the American president, right? But over all the nations that made up the EU. So you could almost even use the United States as an example. It has, we're 50 states that each individual state can have its own little laws, but they all have to bow down to the federal government. So I guess that may be a better, however you want to look at it, but people surely get what I'm talking about. So you had this thing called the Star League, and you had this one family that ran shit called the Camerons. and they had it basically written into law where only a Cameron could be First Lord, so you had this line of succession. So anyway, the Cameron line gets wiped out through this thing. People can look that up or whatever. I'm not going to get into all that. And when the Cameron line gets wiped out, you had all the nation states that made up the Star League. They were all ruled by their own ruling families, and all these ruling families wanted to be the new First Lord. So they were all declaring themselves First Lord, and obviously they're rivals. So then, the bullets started flying, and then they all basically succeeded from the Star League, and the Star League broke apart. And then they were fighting wars to see who was the true successor to the First Lord. So that's why they're called the Succession Wars. So, anyway, you have those Succession Wars, and they basically end because you have these guys called the clans, which are these human-like peoples that nobody originally knew where they came from. So they basically come from the outer reaches, like far afield of what's called the Inner Sphere. So the Inner Sphere is basically like the galactic empire or the remnants of the Star League, that like known space to humanity, basically. And these clans came from outside of that, and they had like super hyper technology. Their entire species was based on like genetic manipulation, and they didn't. Their ruling caste, none of them. All of them were basically born in a test tube. They were genetically bred to be what they were. They had a caste system, and the caste system was basically divided by what you were designed in the test tube to be. You come out of the test tube, and you basically are stuck in that caste, that role in society. And it was run by the warrior caste. So this warrior caste of the clans are basically running shit. They decide to invade the Inner Sphere. So you have this thing called the clan invasion, where the clan shows up, all the clans show up, and they're trying to get to Terra, Earth, and conquer Earth. And the clan, in the clan mythos, their basically religion, their saga, whatever you want to call it, the clans believe that there's 20 different clans that all have like a totem animal, and they're all named after their totem animal. The clan that takes over Earth is the one to conquer Earth, becomes what they call the Ill Clan, and it basically becomes the preeminent clan forever and can decide the fate of everything. So not only are the clans trying to conquer the Inner Sphere, they're also like rivals amongst each other and trying to be the first to do so. So that's your what's called the clan invasion era. Not to give a shitload of spoilers, but that doesn't work out for the clans. They end up getting beaten in a couple spots, and there's basically a truce formed between them and the Inner Sphere. And it's almost like how Korea is currently, where we have the 38th parallel on Earth and the Koreas are divided there. They basically drew a line in space. I don't know how you do that because it's three-dimensional, but let's suspend our belief here for a while. So they drew this line in space and said the clans can basically, exist on this side of the line, but they can't attack or raid or do anything on this other side of the line, can't try to conquer planets for X amount of years. I think it was like 30 years or something like that. So this was supposed to give time for the Inner Sphere to get its shit together and get basically built up to a technological level to be able to stand toe-to-toe with the clans, where they would never be able to conquer Earth. So it was like a delaying action that the Inner Sphere won, essentially. So what ends up happening is during this downtime, the Inner Sphere, who had been fighting all this time, they ally together to stop the clans because they had this existential threat that they all basically had to get along to fight. Then splits back up and starts fighting again the fucking moment the clans stopped invading. So that's essentially called the Civil War era. You had this big nation called the Federated Commonwealth that was essentially, there was two big nation states called the Lyran Commonwealth, and the other one was called the Federated Sons. And the first prince of the Federated Sons married the daughter of the Archon of the Lyran Commonwealth, and they formed this big super nation called the Federated Commonwealth. So imagine if Oh, this will really make some people imagine if Donald Trump was America's emperor, right? And imagine Putin had a daughter, and Trump married Putin's daughter, and the United States and Russia became like a big super nation or whatever. That's basically the equivalent of what happened in Battletech. Well, after the clan invasion thing happened, some shit went down, and that nation split back apart into its, pre-marriage components, and that's what's called the Civil War era. Then after that, you had a thing where, man, there's just so much lore. So you had this big company. Think of like what's your big phone company over there, Macca?
For us, Telstra, I suppose.
Telstra. Okay. Well, here in the United States, it'd be like a Verizon or an AT&T, and I think in Europe it'd be like Vodafone, something like that. So imagine one of those giant telecommunication companies, but that like spans the galaxy. There's this one called Comstar that's like that, and they control literally all interplanetary communication. They have these things called hyperpulse generators, which send messages from planet to planet faster than the speed of light, and they're the only people with the technology to build and maintain these hyperpulse generators. So they always claim to be totally neutral, and not on anybody's side, but they're obviously, that's, anybody that wields that much power and says shit like that and is, obviously full of shit, which comes to fruition in the fluff. But basically they control all this communication, and they have a standing military, but their military is supposed to only be able to like guard their little embassies, because they have these little embassies on every world that basically house all the communication, stacks and equipment that you basically go to, almost like imagine instead of going to the post office, you went to the Comstar office, and you could basically submit a message to wherever, and then they would send that through their hyperpulse generator to whoever you needed to across the galaxy. So that's basically how it worked. And they had their own little sovereign military that would just protect their little embassies. Well, you had a faction within Comstar called the Word of Blake that were like super religious fanatics. Think of basically Mechanicum in my opinion, Mechanicum is a direct ripoff of Word of Blake / Comstar. It was first, like if you look at when Battletech was invented and when Games Workshop came out with Warhammer, and you read stuff and you read some of the early Battletech novels of Comstar is simply like proto Mechanicum, in my opinion. They wear white robes instead of red, but if you know anything about Mechanicum, you're pretty familiar with how Comstar behaves and treats technology. So anyway, the more like zealous ones that treated technology like a religion, these Word of Blake guys, they split off from Comstar, and Comstar becomes, you have Word of Blake and you have Comstar. Word of Blake's treats it like a religion, and Comstar treats it as more like secular, just treats it as like technology and runs it like a normal corporation. Well, the Word of Blake guys decide that they want to run shit, and they start this thing called the Jihad. And there's a whole lot that goes into it that I'm not going to get into because we'd be here all night just talking about this one era of Battletech. But basically, everything goes to shit. Everybody fights everyone, because Word of Blake basically does all these false flag attacks, and everybody thinks that everybody's after each other when it's really them puppeteering everything. And then eventually everyone finds out. This coalition is formed to get rid of the Word of Blake. They're basically genocided in the universe. Everybody gets together and decides that they're just going to kill like everything that has anything to do with the Word of Blake. In doing all of this, almost everybody's military-industrial complex is crippled. Everybody's broke. There's tons of technology that's lost. Everything's destroyed and all that stuff. So that was all called the Jihad era. And then right after the Jihad era, you had to have, so if you look at the map of the way the Battletech universe is laid out, of the way the inner sphere, it's all like a pie shape. So imagine all the wedges of the pie, when they get to their narrowest point in the middle, that's where all the slices would rub up against each other. Well, normally, that's where Comstar was at. They took up the center part, and they basically acted like a buffer state of all those central worlds to the known galaxy to keep all these nation states from constantly being in contact all in this one little area where you'd have all this fighting. So when the Word of Blake was defeated, the coalition that defeated him was led by this guy named Devlin Stone, who hated all of this like neo-feudalism that the Inner Sphere is run by, like where every nation state has a monarch and all this bullshit, and that they're all fighting to become this first lord. He thinks all that's stupid, and he wants to basically create a galactic republic type thing. So he creates this thing called the Republic of the Sphere, and everybody agrees to allow him to do it and act as a buffer state. And so it's basically like a space UN, but it's its own entity. So imagine if the UN was given like its own island or something. Like we recreated Atlantis or whatever in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean and named it the Republic of the Sphere, and we all donated troops and military equipment to them where they had essentially the most powerful military, and they were supposed to be like a neutral force that if anybody got out of line, they'd go deal with it. So you had what was called the Republic era, and then in classic, human fashion, and if you know anything about Battletech is essentially Game of Thrones in space. So if you like Game of Thrones and you like all the political shit, you would definitely like all the Battletech lore. It's essentially like reading a sci-fi Game of Thrones novel. So anyway, the Republic has its own problem with their government and corruption and shit like that, and they sort of have a little bit of infighting, and as soon as that happens, a couple of the nation states see that as, well, this is our opening, because they had the biggest army and could stomp us all out, if we didn't agree to basically let them do their thing. Let's pounce on them now when they're doing this infighting, and we can basically, go back to doing what we want to do again. So they jump the borders on the Republic and attack them, and once again you have all this fucking crazy fighting, but things are still so messed up from the jihad that everybody's just kind of scraping by on military and just basically using anything they can get their hands on, and that's kind of where we're at in the current timeline, and that's called the Dark Ages. And it's called the Dark Ages because everybody essentially got bombed back to the Stone Age during the jihad.
Okay.
So, I know that was a real, long response to you talk about the different eras, but that's basically how Battletech works, is so after this, right now we're in the Dark Ages, so it's my understanding that in the next couple years, they're going to push the timeline forward again, and they'll have a new era, and they'll put out like new mechs, new material, new fluff, new novels, whatever, and we'll just keep going from there. So instead of like throwing the baby out with the bathwater, rewriting the rules from the ground up, redoing all the quote-unquote codexes, whatever, doing all that shit, they just do like an add-on whenever it's time for a quote-unquote new edition. It's not really a new edition because you play with the same rules. They'll just add in new mechs, add in new fluff, add in new whatever, just keep growing the timeline. And it's one of those things, if you don't like it, like say you were like, the jihad shit, you don't have to play it. You just play before jihad or after jihad or whatever. You just don't play games that take place in that period that you don't like.
But of course, it does use some of the same miniatures as well, but then some of the mechs are also retired, and you don't have them in other time eras, or maybe they just haven't been invented in other time eras.
Correct. So, so for example, in the Dark Ages, the Dark Ages are 3031 through the year 3999, and the TROs, the technical readout books, which are basically the books that introduce new mechs and new equipment, are only up to 3150. So they've not even explored all of the, Dark Ages yet. But anyway, those mechs, like I'm trying to think of a good one. There's one called a Tenshi, a TENSHI. It's a Draconis Combine mech. It's invented in 3130 or something like that. So obviously you can't use that in a game during the clan invasions, which takes place in 3050 because it wasn't around.
But of course, as you said, even though something may not be used in another edition, it's still perfectly viable in its own. So, the closest comparison I can think of, again, the majority Games Workshop games players out there is, if you had an edition of 40k and they're like, okay, now 6th edition is a thing, Gilliman's back alive, 8th edition is a thing, we've jumped the timeline forward, but you can still play 7th edition and it's fully supported.
Right, but, I mean, it's even, in my opinion, better than that because the core rules are still the same. Like, if you want to play a game in the Succession Wars era and you want to play a game in Dark Age era, which is like, let's see, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There's 6 eras in between those two. The core rules are still the same. It's just the mech availability is different. So it'd be like having a different army list, but you still have the same rules.
Yeah, so more like the campaign books then, you'd get in certain editions of 40k, just 40k itself isn't changing.
Correct.
So, just trying to find the best way for us to explain it, because obviously this is going to be an introduction to Battletech for some people.
Right.
So even me, I'm still getting... There's a lot of Battletech lore. I'm still getting up to speed on it.
Yeah, a lot is... I think there's probably more Battletech lore than any 2 games combined, and I say that with full knowledge of how much lore there is for 40k and 30k.
Yep, that's it's a sizable figure, we'll say. Sizable figure.
Yeah.
So, yeah, no, that's cool. Okay, so the rules, there's backwards compatibility. There's the availability of all these different rules editions. So, online right now, you can go through, is it Drive-Thru RPG?
Yeah, Drive-Thru, if you want to get the digital rules, which is the cheapest way to get the rules, I think the rule book on there is like $15, so I sent you the link.
Yes.
For Classic.
For Total Warfare, and Alpha Strike's $20.
Yeah. So for $35, you can get both rule books to play either game. So Alpha Strike, I could teach someone to play Alpha Strike in about 15 minutes. No joke. It's very, very easy. The cool thing about Alpha Strike is a lot of people are like, it's too easy, all this stuff. And I mean, I get their argument. I'm not saying that that's invalid. I'm just simply saying if you just play the most basic form of Alpha Strike, which is like you only use the stuff on the cards and you just use the basic, rules that they give on the first 10 pages of the book, yes, it's very simple. That said, there's like a whole nother 150 pages to that book that essentially add in like pilot abilities, weather, special munitions, battlefield conditions, different, anything that you can basically think of. And the more and more you add in, you can basically make it as complicated as you want. Like all of it's optional. So you can take something that's fairly simple and make it, pretty complicated if you want to add, more stuff to it. That said, at its heart, it's designed to be like a super fast, streamlined game that you can play in an hour, like more of like a skirmish level game. Whereas Classic is each mech essentially, the closest thing I can attribute it to that people would know about would be like D&D. So if you play normal Classic Battletech, each mech essentially has something as complicated as a D&D character sheet for each mech that you have to basically keep a lot of bookkeeping on, and it takes a long time to kill a mech, and it goes through different things. You can do critical hits to it, it can lose movement, you can blow weapons off, you can blow limbs off. There's all this different stuff that can happen to it, and they're designed to take a beating. So if me and you played a game of Classic and you had 8 miniatures and I had 8 miniatures, it may still take us, 2-3 hours to play that game, simply because, like I said, each mech has like a D&D style character sheet that you go through, and it's not designed for me just to shoot you once and you die. That can happen still, but it's rare. Normally it doesn't happen.
Yeah, that just stray headshot is very rare.
Yep. And it also depends, like certain mechs have almost like a Death Star type weakness built into them. The mech that I used, this Thunderbolt that I built, this 5SS Thunderbolt that I built for the Henry's Cold Paint like mech class that we played the big version at War Games Camp. It has SRM ammo in the center torso. The thing with putting ammo in the center torso is when somebody rolls on the location chart of what location they hit, if they roll Snake Eyes, you hit the center torso, but it's an automatic crit chance. So let's say right off the bat, you shoot me with something like a PPC, you roll for location after you hit with it, you roll for location, you hit center torso, possible crit, then you roll your dice and it is a critical hit, and then you roll to see where the crit lands. If it lands on that ammo, that whole ammo box goes up and it'll kill the mech in one shot.
Which is, of course, exactly what you want if you're playing that mech.
Yeah. But obviously there are other mech designs that don't have ammo in the center torso where that's not a possibility of happening. But you can always get, headshotted with a weapon that does more than 10 or more damage and then get a critical hit on the cockpit and the mech's just dead in one shot.
Yeah, and we did see that in the large-scale mech game. That did happen, so...
Yes.
Didn't kill in one shot, but it definitely fucked it up.
Yes.
Blowing out gyros, concussing the pilot, that sort of deal.
Yep, there's a lot of little things to keep track of in Classic. There's a lot of little nuances and cool things. Like, you can basically, like James alluded to, you can shoot the gyro out of a mech, you can shoot the engine out of a mech, you can just core the entire center torso, you can blow the head off, you can blow both legs off, you can just outright kill the pilot by shooting it. There's several different ways to destroy a mech that it can end up dying. You can cripple it by destroying all the weapons, and it's basically useless. There are also rules built in called force withdrawal rules that is essentially the morale system. It basically assumes that not everybody's a suicidal idiot, and when a mech takes a certain amount of damage, that person is going to think better of what they're doing and try to retreat and save themselves and their machine. So that's how you play most games, is with force withdrawal rules. I didn't do that in our big game because I wasn't, I was just basically all for fun, just shooting at each other.
Yeah, you didn't want someone to get damaged and then just their mech just leaves the battlefield. It was a fight to the death, mano a mano, in the fucking gladiator pit.
Exactly.
So, okay. So that's the core sort of rules between Alpha Strike and Total Warfare. We've also got the Battletech wiki was obviously the background image that I had on for most of the sort of first half of the chat. Now, that wiki, like most wikis, can be used to sort of find out about the lore of the universe, and just sort of a quick refresh where one maybe doesn't have the time to actually get into the proper books and read the lore. Is the best way of describing it, I guess. But some of these other ones you've linked, like the Master Unit List website, masterunitlist.info. Do you want to explain what this is about?
Okay, so this is actually owned by so Topps. You guys don't have. So do you guys have like trading cards for like soccer teams or rugby teams over there, like the kids collect?
Yeah, we do. Not very common, but we do.
Okay, so there's one of the biggest ones in the United States is called Topps, and they started as a baseball card company, but they do cards for everything. It's spelled TOPPS. So of all people who own Battletech, it's actually Topps, the baseball card company. Don't ask me how they acquired it or why they acquired it, but that's who owns it. That being said, they basically own it, but don't really do anything with it, so they license it out to this company called Catalyst Game Labs, who are the people who write all the books, write all the rules, and basically own the license and, do all that. So Catalyst Game Labs handles this website called Battletech Master Unit List. And if you go to that website, it basically is a library of all the eras of Battletech, all the factions in Battletech, all the mechs in Battletech, all of that stuff. And you can search for any of that by it's all like circular. So you can click on eras and then find that era, and then within that era select a faction, and then it'll show all of the unit availabilities for that faction in that era. So that way, so basically say you want to do a Draconis Combine army, and you're going to play with a friend, and you decided to play in the year 3041, which would fall within the Succession Wars era, late Succession War. You would go to factions on there, click Draconis Combine, and then on the side, on the right side of the screen, it'll show the different eras that the Draconis Combine existed in, which should be essentially all of them. You would find late Succession War, which will have the years underneath of it, and you would click that, and you'll get a screen that basically has every unit in Battletech that the Draconis Combine might have in it during that era. So basically you could then build your army list out of units available to them.
So yeah, pretty good, handy little tool.
The other thing that's on there is when you actually select said unit. So I'm not looking at it, but I know for a fact that there's a mech called a dragon that they would have during that time period. They would probably actually have several versions of that mech. If you click on that specific model of that dragon, you'll get a screen to come up, and it'll have two main things on it. For one, it'll have the Alpha Strike card, which is the only thing you need to play Alpha Strike. So if you want to get in for a minimum investment and you want a game that you can pick up real fast just to get in and play with some miniatures, you could buy that Alpha Strike rulebook for $20 and you're in. That's it. You just need that $20 rulebook, and you need a few miniatures, and all of the quote-unquote codexes / unit entries / rules or whatever are free on this master unit list website. So when you click on a unit, it'll have the Alpha Strike card right there. You can print that off, and that's all you need for that unit to use it in Alpha Strike. The other thing that it has on there is it'll have a little bar, or it'll have two pictures of the front of two different books. And if you're wanting to play Classic, it'll tell you the technical readout book that the fluff for that unit is in, and then it'll give you the record sheet book that the rules for that unit is in. So that's the other, if you play Classic, that's the other thing we kind of need to talk about, the different types of books. So the main two books for Classic, the main two types, are technical readouts and record sheets. So technical readouts, all they have is basically the unit picture and the fluff, but they don't have the rules really to play with it. And then you have the record sheets, which is just nothing but the sheet that has the rules on it. So you can buy both and have both, or you could buy one or the other. I don't know why you would just buy the technical readout. You're either going to buy just the record sheet or buy both, basically. But they're not expensive. Like I was telling James, I think you can buy all the record sheets for all of one era for like $5. They're usually $4.99, and that's usually like roughly 300 different unit record sheets for the $5, and they've never went bad. The only time, like I said, that they would ever be quote unquote invalidated was when they switched the point system. But that switched in the 90s, and it's been the same ever since. So if you bought record sheets in 1994, for example, you would still be using the same record sheets in 2019.
There you go. So pretty good backwards compatibility there.
Yeah, for $5, it's not. You're not going to waste your $5. You're pretty much always going to be able to use those. But anyway, so
you sure good. They? Sorry to take a cheap dig here.
Oh no, you're fine.
You sure they shouldn't charge like $60 for a hardcover book that'll be invalidated in 3 years?
No, they probably shouldn't do that.
No.
So, anyway, so that's the other reason. So if you play Classic, you're still going to use this website a lot because you're like, oh, I have this. This model looks cool. I want to play this Night Star model, but I need to know where to find the rules. You go to the Battletech Master Unit list. You go to the search box and type in the name of the mech. You type in Night Star. You hit enter, and it'll bring up all the different models of the Night Star in a list. You can click on any model you want, and it'll it'll show you the record sheet book that the rules for that particular mech are in, and then if you have it, you just open up that record sheet and find it. If you don't have it, you would need to buy that record sheet book to then get those rules. And if you want to play Alpha Strike with it, the rules are going to be right there on that page. So that's the main thing that you're going to do with this, is it's going to tell you all your mech, vehicle. That's the other thing about Battletech, is it's not just giant robots, it's everything. There are helicopters, submarines, hovercraft, wheeled tanks, track tanks, VTOLs, widges, conventional atmospheric aircraft, aerospace aircraft. I mean, pretty much everything you can think of. And that unit master list thing will give you the availability of all of those things for your faction, for whatever era you want to play in.
I do kind of love that, what I call the droid control ship, that giant ball-shaped one that you printed out.
Oh, the dropship. Yeah, that's a mech dropship.
Yeah, that thing's cool. Something cool about the ball. So, okay. So that's what our Battletech Master List gives us. Now, Catalyst Games. Do you want to explain Catalyst Labs, Catalyst Games?
Okay, so that's, like I said, that's the company who owns Battletech. So all of these things that you can get on Drive-Thru-RPG, like the rulebook and stuff like that, you can also get on Catalyst's website. And there's also a few other products, like their starter box and a few other things that you can only get. Well, I wouldn't say you can only get, but it's like the main website. It's like how you can buy Games Workshop directly from Games Workshop, but you can also go to, Wayland Games or whatever if you're in the UK, or the War Store in the US or whatever, and buy their stuff as well. But I figured people should know, like, that's the official, distributor of Battletech stuff is Catalyst, and that's their website. I hate their website. They have one of the worst websites known to man. That's why I always tell people, just go to Drive-Thru-RPG and buy your digital stuff. It's way easier to find there. I can never find anything on Catalyst's site.
Yeah, this website is like an early 2000s website, basically.
Yeah, it's awful, and they're at all the conventions. So I mean, I tell them to their face. I'm like, guys, you have to do something with your website. It's bad. They usually just laugh, but it's true. It's not a good website. Like I said, I use Drive-Thru-RPG just so I can find things easier. I mean, they're still, getting the money. It's just a middleman, whatever. But I mean, people still need to know that that's the official website, is that particular one.
Yep. Okay, so next on our list, Ironwind Metals. So, now we're getting into the actual miniatures.
Correct. So, okay, so we'll talk about this and then we'll talk about the Kickstarter. So Catalyst Game Labs is an RPG company. They make pen and paper RPGs, and they make a few board games, but they typically do RPGs. They own, like, Shadowrun is their big one, and they just recently got the rights to do Dragonlance from D&D, which is one of the bigger, like, D&D story arcs or universes within D&D. Settings. I guess it's a setting. So they own the rights to the Dragonlance setting for D&D, so they're writing all the new, whatever the current edition to D&D is, they do all the Dragonlance stuff. That being said, they bought the rights from Topps, or leased the rights, because Topps still owns the rights, to reprint. Basically, they wanted, because Battletech originally was a hybrid RPG board game, and then it eventually grew into where you could just play the board game or just play the RPG, or you could still integrate them. Well, when Catalyst bought it, or leased it from Topps, they leased it and also leased Shadowrun and some other stuff that used to be FOSSA properties. They kind of did it with just the intent to release the printed material for the game, because there was a lot of people that already owned the miniatures, but they just wanted to have a place. Because basically what happened was FOSSA, the original company that owned Battletech, was going to go bankrupt. So instead of go bankrupt, they sold all of their good IPs to keep the company afloat. So they sold the IP for Shadowrun, they sold the IP for Battletech, all that. So that's how Topps wound up with it when they sold off all their assets. So anyway, they saw a market to start reprinting all this print material. So that's why they sell all the print material. That being said, they're not a miniatures company. They have no capacity to make miniatures. They had no desire to make miniatures. And now they own the rights to this thing that's essentially a miniatures game. So instead of doing the miniatures themselves, they like subleased their lease to this company called Ironwind Metals that's actually out of Ohio, which is the neighboring state to me where I live. So like when you were here, James, we could have hopped in the car and drove like 2 hours and 15 minutes to the place that makes all of the official Battletech miniatures.
Oh, why didn't we do that?
We can't. So
we had no time.
Yeah, we had no time, but it's actually pretty cool because that all this company does is make like miniatures out of white metal. That's the only material they use. The other cool thing about them is if you go to the factory and you buy your mechs direct there, like if I were to drive over there tomorrow and buy mechs from them, they'll just sell them to you by the pound. So you literally just take like a plastic sack and just walk around in their bins of these mechs. They're not even in packages yet. And you just grab what you want, put it in a bag, and they just sell it to you by the pound instead of by individual model.
If only other companies did that.
Yeah. So you can get like a normal sized army for Battletech in Classic, let's say, is like 8, I'd say 4 to 10 or 4 to 12 models, and the normal sized army for Alpha Strike is like 8 to 15 models. So let's say 15 models max. So you can get people have basically said that it averages about, because they're made of metal, they're pretty heavy, but you can basically get about 16 to 18 mechs in a pound. And I think they charge like $40 US for a pound. So you can basically get an entire huge Battletech army for $40 if you go there in person.
Yeah, and if you're playing Classic, that means you'll have an army where the games will go hours and hours and hours.
Yeah, that would be overkill. That'd be like 2 armies for Classic. But it's kind of cool that they do that, and you get like a tour of the factory and how they make stuff, whatever. So it's pretty neat. The people that work there are really nice people. But anyway, that's the official like metal models that are for Battletech. So the other way to get models is Catalyst has just recently, like within the last 2 years, started making their own Battletech models. And they're the plastic ones that come in the current starter box. And they also just did a Kickstarter where they resculpted, I think they resculpted like 100 and some different mechs, 100 low hundreds, like 119, something like that. Different mech designs got totally resculpted. It turned into plastic models, and those are going to be sold directly through Catalyst, not through Ironwind. And they're going to be the most up-to-date mech models. I'm not going to lie to people. A lot of the mech models are shit, the original metal ones, because they've never really went back and updated them. So if you play like a catapult from the early Succession Wars, the model for that was probably sculpted in like 1988, and it's still the same model.
Yeah, that'll really.
So,
well,
yeah. So it's
but the other thing is people have been updating the models themselves as well, especially in the like 3D printing market, as opposed to.
Right. I was going to get to that in the end, but anyway. As far as official channels, you have Ironwind Metal, so you need to know about that. And especially if you're wanting to play vehicles or infantry, that's where you're going to go. And I don't want to totally shit on Ironwind. Like, their newer sculpts, like the stuff that they've come out with in the last 4 or 5 years, really aren't bad. I mean, they're still metal miniatures. Some people really, really hate metal miniatures. I'm not a huge fan myself. They're not... I can take it or leave it. I much prefer plastic or resin, but I'm not going to, like, not buy a model just because it's metal if the sculpt's good. And some of their later sculpt stuff really honestly isn't that bad.
Fair enough.
So, I mean, it's just some of those sculpts they have are just really, really, really bad. I mean,
they've just aged poorly.
Yeah, really poorly. They're very 80s looking. But a lot of those sculpts are the ones that just got updated with this current Kickstarter and are going to be fully updated, and they look great, and they're going to be coming out in plastic. So they're going to be cheaper, in a better material, and be a way better updated design. And then also, as James said, with the release of a lot of these modern video games, like the new Battletech, the actual official Battletech from Piranha Game Lab video game, which we need to talk about, because it's like, if you like that video game is 90% just playing a game of classic Battletech. So if you have that video game, that Battletech video game, I think you can buy it on Steam or whatever for like, I think it's on sale right now for like $15 or whatever. And it's a really good game. Like, everybody that plays it loves that game. And if you like that you would definitely like the board game version or the miniatures game version of Battletech, because it's essentially, that's all they did was port it over to a video game. But anyway, people have been taking those 3D models from that video game and from like MechWarrior 5 and MechWarrior Online, and they'll take that 3D model and just run it through a program that turns it into an STL, and then you can print that out on a 3D printer and have that's what we did with these big mechs. So if you see pictures of like the big mech that I did or the one that Macca did, I mean, that look like a very up-to-date, modern, super awesome model, because it is. It's designed for, a video game that's less than a year old, so it's going to be top-of-the-line 3D modeling that some artist did, that you're basically just 3D printing into a physical object.
And they are nice. They are beautiful models. I was going to say, the thing that's letting them down is 3D printing technology, and even then it's not. Like, I mean, they were pretty nice quality, what we were printing out, or what you were printing out.
Especially, like, Photon, if you're printing 6mm mechs, I can print mechs or even, like, Titanica stuff on a Photon that looks just like you painted up, and you couldn't tell that it's not, like, an official, Games Workshop Titan or whatever.
Yeah, no, it looks exactly the same. And again, they do their prototyping on 3D printers, so...
Yeah. Yep, we've talked about that before, I think, me and you.
Yeah. So that's how they do it, and it's how we now do it.
Right. So I just painted, I can actually send you a little picture here. I was just painting on some mechs. They're sitting right here as we're doing this episode. And these are some ones that are the 3D printed ones. This is a Locust and a few Scarabus mechs, and then here's a 3D printed Mad Cat that I've painted. And then I have a full army that is a mix. The first thing I look at when I build a Battletech army is looks, and I'll pick somebody will say, I want to play, Jihad, and I'm going to play this faction, and I'll look and I'll go, well, these guys would be a good matchup, and they fought a lot against your faction, so I'll do this one, and then we can play a little campaign. And I usually play with Chris Duncan and Scott and a few local guys, and that's how we do it. So I'll pick a faction, I'll go to that Battletech unit master list or master unit list page, and I'll print off the list of mechs or whatever I can take. I'll go through that list and I'll pick out the mechs that I know that there's a good model for, whether it's a 3D printed model, a new plastic model from Catalyst, or happens to be one of the metal ones that's still a nice sculpt. And I'll literally circle all the mechs that I know I can get a nice sculpt for or convert something that looks cool. And then I'll sit down and I'll look at, because most mechs have several different models. So when I say model, I don't mean physical model. I mean a model like a car, you know what I mean? A different...
the 1995 version.
Yeah, exactly. A different version.
An F100 or something.
Right. So say I know that Marauder, there's several cool Marauder sculpts, and this faction can take 5 different Marauders. I'll look at each of those 5 Marauders and then choose the version that I like the best. And that's how I'll build my army list. So I basically will only take mechs that I know look cool. I'm not going to take, I'm trying to think of one that has a absolutely horrendous model that people can look up and laugh at. An Imp, that's a good one. So if you Google Battletech Imp, oh my, is it awful. It looks like if Humpty Dumpty were a robot. It literally just looks like he took an egg and glued some mech legs on it. It's fucking awful. So that's something I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole, regardless of what its stats are, how good it is, or whatever, because I'm not into running ugly models. The nice thing about Battletech is I think last time we looked, there's like 800 and some individual mech designs, just mechs. And then on top of that, you have vehicles, and then you have infantry and all those other things we talked about.
Yes, and I think that's something that's rather misunderstood by people, that Battletech, I guess the common misconception I held this too, was that it's all about the mechs. It is not.
No. You can play an all-infantry army, you can play an all-tank army, you can play an all-helicopter army. If you played on the right map, you could play an all-submarine army and just shoot cruise missiles off your submarines. Shit if you want to. So you can build your army pretty much however you want, as long as it obviously fits within the scenario that you and your whoever you're playing with, opponent, are playing. So it's all of that, and then like I said, so you have all these different individual mech designs, like Marauder, Thunderbolt, Locust, all that stuff, and then on top of all that, each of those individual mech designs typically has several variants or configurations. So there might be 19 or 20 different Marauders. So when it's all said and done, I think the last time somebody looked this up, there was like 13 or 14,000 individual unit choices for Battletech that you can build an army list out of.
And the beauty is, you don't have to collect them all. You just get what suits you. Like, there's not such a huge difference where it's like, oh, if you don't have this, you're going to lose your games. It is not like 40k.
No, like I just explained to people, I purely go off looks. I'm not going to take a mech because it looks like shit, and I have no problem winning games or completing objectives. Like, there's going to be several different mechs that perform a similar function or have similar weapons on them. Every great once in a while, you'll run into something that, like, personal preference-wise, as far as equipment, like, my personal preference is I like mechs that move at least one speed category faster than they should. And what I mean by that is, like, an inner sphere light mech typically will move at a walking speed 6 and a running speed 9. So if I took a light mech, I would want it to move faster than that. Like, I want it to be faster than it should be. And then I also like, there's a piece of war gear called a targeting computer that I'm big into. I really like pulse lasers. So there's certain equipment that I really like, and when I see a mech that has like several of those features, it's like it really like fucking gets the blood flowing. Every once in a while, I'll find a mech that like fits like what I really like in a mech that they don't make a good sculpt for, and it pisses me off. But even that, there's still several other ones.
There'll be another variant that's close that you can...
Exactly. And you could always like convert your own or 3D, because I'll be honest, like there's a lot of people that have been just doing their own 3D designs. Like if you go to Thingiverse, there's a shitload of different Battletech designs on there that people have just done themselves. Like there's been people just be like, I like the salamander mech, I don't like the sculpt, nobody makes a good sculpt, I'm just going to make my own that you can look at and tell that it's a salamander immediately, but I'm going to modernize it. And there's people that have done that. And I actually know a few 3D designers that, like there's a mech called a Maelstrom that I really like. It has a shit model, and there's not a new one on the horizon, and I've heavily looked into, like really sat and thought about just hitting up somebody I know that's really good at 3D design and just being like, hey, how much would it cost me to have you redesign this? And then once they did, I could just print as many as I wanted.
Well, for me personally, I'm a Catapult Master Race fan. I think that anything that's got that sort of chicken walker pose is just cool as fuck. And all the humanoid poses are not. therefore, they're there, and you've seen it with me. Like we went through a box of Battletech minis you have, and it's like I get giddy. I get giddy for all the fucking, Chicken Walker type mechs, and then
there's a shitload of those.
Yeah, so there's so much to pick from. Like, you can get so much variety out of that game. It's not funny.
Correct. So, yeah, I mean, it's pretty easy to get a model you like. Like, I've had people originally be like, and like I said, I'm being totally open and honest with everybody. The weakest part of the game is probably the models. That being said, like, you do have to jump through a few extra hoops if you really want a nice model. Like I said, get somebody to 3D print it, or go through this third party that 3D prints them, at least until this Kickstarter fully releases, and then you're going to have roughly, like I said, 120 fully fresh, like, plastic designs that are going to be nice. One of the guys sculpting it is, if you go to Facebook and you look up this guy on Facebook, I think it's TT Gun Miniatures, like the letter T, and then Gun, Gunn Miniatures. Let me look that up. He's actually one of the guys that's sculpting some of the mechs for the Kickstarter. It's called, Tabletop Gun Miniatures. If you look at his stuff on his Facebook page, he's one of the guys, like, doing the sculpts for the new Kickstarter stuff. And I mean, I don't know if you're looking it up now, Macca, but if you look at some of his designs that he's doing, I mean, they look really nice.
We'll get into it later. At the moment, I've got looks like a Mad Cat rotating on the screen in the Kickstarter previews.
Yep, so he was one of the guys that did some of those models. He did the Vulture. If you can find the Vulture on there, he did that specifically. I'm sending you in our Facebook chat. There's 4 mechs that he designed all of these, printed all these, and painted all these. So the mechs that you're looking at there, these are going to be the plastic models that you get in the Kickstarter, those 4. That's some of the 4 models that you're going to get in the starter box.
Now, as you say, there's the 2 different game modes, obviously, your Alpha Strike and Battletech Classic.
Yep.
One is super approachable, the other one is approachable, but time-consuming and full of depth.
Yep.
So, there are people who go, I like 8th edition 40k because it's so simple, easy to get into. Well, this is that. And it's also got that 30k aspect of, like, the complex strategy, the depth of gameplay is also there. You don't have to pigeonhole yourself into one or the other, especially because it's just so damn cheap to get into.
Correct. Also, the thing that people need to understand, if you like any form of competitive play, or you like being able to, like, meet up with somebody you really don't know that well and just say, hey, bring X amount of points and meet me at this game store and we'll play, you basically have to do that with Alpha Strike. You cannot do that with Classic. There's too much so Classic, when you play Classic Battletech, it's always basically a scenario, and you need to play with somebody that you're semi-familiar with, and you need to come up with the scenario together and decide what you're doing. Like, it doesn't work very well if you just say, hey, we're playing this battle value, show up, because you need to know an era, you need to know what kind of the story that you're playing so that you have 2 opposing factions that sort of make sense, all of that stuff. So if you're really into, like, campaign stuff and telling a story and, like, that a little bit of an RPG element, you do that with Classic. If you just want to, like, play with some robots and just play at a points value and play a quick game and do it, like, either in a tournament style or just show up to a store with models, that's what Alpha Strike's for. And not that you can't put a story and stuff to Alpha Strike, it's just you don't have to. Where if you want to play Classic, you pretty much have to.
Yep. Yeah, so there's a lot of options out there. And of course, on Amazon now, you can already get the Battletech game. And this one's Classic, is it?
It's both. So it comes with all the cards. So you get in the new quote unquote starter box, which is the BattleTech Game of Armored Warfare box. It's got a bright blue Battlemaster on the front with red and white stripes on it, and he's fighting a bunch of Capellan Death Commandos, which are black and green mechs, and he's like using the arm of one mech to beat another mech or something like that. That's actually a famous part in one of the novels. That's First Prince Hans Davian. That would be like the President of the United States jumping in his mech and beating the fuck out of like some Russian Spetsnaz one-on-one. That's what happened. I could see
Trump doing that, yeah.
Yeah. So, anyway, that's what's going on in that picture. But that particular box set comes with 8 Inner Sphere mechs that were all around during the late Succession Wars, and you get a novel in there. I think it's like a 125-page novella, but it's a pretty cool book. You get that in there. You get a map of the Inner Sphere. You get like a fluff book that's like a breakdown of that time period, like the Inner Sphere at a glance. You get a couple map sheets. So we need to explain map sheets and miniature play as well, which we'll do that after I talk about the contents of the box. So you get the 8 mechs, a bunch of gaming material, basically. You get the cheat sheets that'll tell you, like, have all your tables and what you need to roll and movement stuff and all that for Classic. Then you get all these little playing cards. They're like playing card size with your Alpha Strike stats on them. Those are basically just fancy versions of what you can print off of that Master Unit List website. So you can, all those cards are free online, but you get like a nice version of them. And you get some other stuff. And I think it's like $50-$60. I think it's $60 retail. You can get it, sometimes they have it on sale for $50, which isn't bad for if you go to a convention that Catalyst is at, all of the miniatures that come in that box, they basically just bring the miniatures and they literally throw them in a 5-gallon plastic bucket. And on the outside of the bucket, it'll just be written Catapult, and then another bucket will be Battlemaster, and another bucket will be Locust, on all the mechs in that starter. And they have a shelf behind the thing, and you can just buy as many of those mechs as you want for $5 a piece. So it's kind of fun. It reminds me of like going to like the penny candy store or whatever when you're a kid. You just go up to the counter and you're like, yeah, I need like 4 Battlemasters and 3 Locusts. And they literally grab this whole bucket that's just filled with these plastic miniatures all the way to the brim. And they set it on the counter and they're just like, yeah, grab any 5 that you want or what. It's pretty funny.
It's a good way of getting into it, isn't it?
Right. So you can get those mechs that way. If you're lucky enough to go to a convention where Catalyst is at, which I have there's 2 huge conventions that are within a couple hours drive of me. I guess 3 actually, Adepticon, Origins, and Gen Con that they're at, that I can do that. But otherwise, you got to buy the starter box. But even if you bought them at $5 a piece, you're still going to have $40 in just the miniatures. So for the extra $15, you get, like I said, you get a novel, you get all those gaming aids, you get all the Alpha Strike cards, and you get a bunch of just cool like posters and a map and some other neat shit. So I think it's good value. I had no problem. As soon as it came out, I basically pre-ordered it. And the mech sculpts in there are pretty good. They're, I think, 1.5 years old at this point, but there's some of the nicer sculpts that they have for mechs. And then the only ones that are going to be better than those, like I said, are going to be these new Kickstarter ones coming out. They basically learned from that first batch. And like I said, they are nice, but these new ones coming out are going to be next level compared to those.
Fair enough then. Well, okay, so what was that last thing you wanted to touch off on as well? Sorry, you mentioned just a moment ago, I'm just having a mental blank.
Oh, yeah, shit, I'm trying to remember. There was something that I was like, we need to talk about this.
Was it the sheets?
And, all right, hit pause and go back and listen. No, I'm just playing. Shit. People at home are screaming at us right now. He said this.
Well, we don't know. We can't hear you people at home.
Yeah, I don't even remember now.
Oh well, it'll come to us later, and then we'll update.
Yeah. There was something that I needed to get into and explain to people, but I don't remember now. Like I said.
Oh well, it'll come to us, and then we'll be like, oh fuck, and it'll probably be like an hour after we stop recording. Fuck, we didn't mention this. This is crucial. People have to know.
Yeah.
This is the cure for cancer.
Oh, but we can bring the novels are really good. You can either buy the paper. Unfortunately, there's only one. So there are about 7 of the early novels that are in audiobook form, but they're abridged. So they're only like 3 hours long when they should be like 13 hours long. And I don't like them because they're abridged. I think you miss out on too much. So I tell people that they exist, but I tell people not to buy them. You can obviously still order the hard copy of the books or find them in half-price books or whatever. The best way to buy them is just go to Amazon and buy the Kindle version and just put a Kindle app on your phone. That's what I've done. Most of the novels are $4.99. Some of them are $1.99. So they're between $1.99 and $4.99 for a novel. And they're like full-length, 300 to 500 page novels. And they're really good. I really like the books a lot. You can look up the reading order online. Just type in Battletech novel reading order to get the reading order. I think they're up to around 100. There's like 100 and some novels now for Battletech. So I think I've read 43. So I'm not quite halfway through all the novels. I'm up to the part in the timeline of where they've forced a truce on the clans and the Civil War is about to start.
Right. That's basically that middle period. So it's after like the second time period.
Yep.
Before the Civil War and before the Dark Age. Yep.
So I've really enjoyed the novels a lot, and I highly recommend people to read them. They read like a novel, so there's like drama and characters and all that. There's another type of thing you can read for Battletech that's much more like the Black Books for Heresy, where it's almost like reading a history book. They're called source books. There's source books, error reports, historicals. There's a couple different ones. I sent you some examples yesterday or whatever that you can kind of look through or whatever.
Yes.
So the source books, So the source books are like, you'll have Handbook Davian, House Davian or whatever, which are the Federated Sons. So it'll be like all the information for that one faction. And it'll be, somewhere between 100 and 200 pages that's nothing but about that faction and its history. So that's kind of what the handbooks and source books are for. They'll be very narrow and focused that usually just talk about one faction or something in the game like that. Then you have historicals and error reports, and what those will be, you'll have like an error report with a year after it, like error report 3060. So that will basically just start at the beginning of the year 3060 and go through a timeline and talk about everything that happened to every faction during that time span. And it's usually just like little blurbs. It's almost like when they used to do the timeline, I don't know if they still do or not, in the 40K codexes where you'd have like the 3 or 4 pages of like the timeline with the little boxes.
Yeah, I don't know if they still do that. I think they do.
Okay, so it's a little more information than that, but it's very similar to that. And it's like a whole book of that, but it's essentially that for every faction all at once, and it just goes through everything. And then you have the historicals, which will cover like a whole period. So you'll have like the War of 3039 historical, and it'll go through that entire war. It doesn't go through, it'll only touch on the factions that were involved in said war and the personalities within that faction that were involved in that war, and it's just that war narrow in scope. But all of those read essentially like, obviously it's fake future history, but it's a little more dry, I guess. but I still like it a lot. It's just a different type of reading. Those books are extremely good if you're trying to do research on a certain, paint scheme or unit or whatever. Like if you're doing a campaign with friends and you want information on how to set things up, what type of battles you should fight, what type of missions you should do, those are great for that. And actually, a lot of those, they'll tell you the information, like this is what happened, this was a battle that was fought, and then if you turn the page, there'll actually be like a mini scenario section of how to play through that conflict.
Oh, that's cool.
And then they actually have full books dedicated to nothing but, playing through an entire, era or conflict or whatever. And then there's certain events that are so big, they span multiple of those historical books. Like the Jihad period, I think there's like 10 separate source books that are all between 100 and 250 pages. And you would have to start at the first one and read through all of them to get all the Jihad information. And I sat and did that, and I think it was like 1,600 pages of reading or something, just to read about the Jihad.
And how expensive would it be for someone to do that, by the way?
You can download those books from that Drive-Thru RPG. They're usually like $10, so that'd be about $100 to get that 1,600 pages of fluff.
There you go. So, not crazy at all, is it?
That's not too bad. And then, obviously, you can get a lot of those books, have been printed a long time ago. People might have them on the shelf or whatever. You can usually get on eBay and get hard copies of those books for the same price, gently used. They're still going to be in good shape. That's how I got a lot of mine. Because I usually like having the hard copy. I like being able to physically hold it in my hand and look at the art and all that. But I also get the digital version just so, if I'm on a plane or bored at work or, whatever, I can read it on my phone or computer or whatever.
Oh, very good. Oh, well, I reckon that takes us to the end for this little episode. We will do more on Battletech. I'm sure I'll be able to convince you to come on again to talk about it more.
I love it.
But this is just a quick little introduction to Battletech from us. Well, from you, really. I'm just here listening and learning myself more than anything. So, yeah, thank you very much for coming on today, Ryan. Is there anything else you want to talk about before you pop off?
Just what I forgot earlier that I still don't remember. If I remembered that, I would tell people.
Yeah, well...
Oh, I know what it was, and it is very important.
Go.
Okay, so classic Battletech. We should have covered this right at the beginning when we talked about classic. So when people see classic Battletech, the first thing they're going to see when they look it up is that it's played on hex mat. Right?
Yes.
You don't know this because you met me through Battletech, and I think only serial killers play on hexes. And because I have an actual imagination, I don't need that bullshit. I just enraged tons of people that know about Battletech, by the way. But anyway, so there is a use for hexes, and I'll kind of explain the difference. So when it first started, back in the early 80s, remember it was just supposed to be a board game / RPG. So board games have spaces, and they're meant to be played like on a coffee table or whatever. So it was originally designed that you would have this map sheet that had several hexes on it, and the hexes actually had like an elevation rating right on the hex and a number on the hex. And you put your mechs on these hexes, and all the movement and facing and all that goes off of hexes. That's why the mechs are on hex bases. And it's supposed to each of those hexes is supposed to represent a really big area, like this area the size of like a soccer pitch or a football field. Not like that little physical area. So that way you could condense a big battlefield into this like small, basically placemat that you could put on your kitchen table and play with a friend. And you could put like, 3 or 4 of these together to have essentially what would be probably a 2x3 board, but it would be similar in function to playing on a 6x4 if you actually measured the distances out, if that makes sense.
It does. Okay,
so a lot of time when you see people playing classic Battletech, you're going to walk by and they're just going to have mechs on this, what looks like a, tablecloth or whatever with hexes printed on it with some force and shit. And I don't like it because in the modern day and age, that's not going to attract new players. Like when you walk by, when you're at Gen Con or Adepticon and you're walking by all the game tables and you see all these people playing on terrain and it's 3D and it looks great, and then you get to the end of the row and there's like 4 40-year-old people that have this like placemat down with some hexes drawn on it with these, all metal models from 1983. That's not, to me, that wouldn't be appealing. Like, I wouldn't like stop everything and go, I gotta play this. You know what I mean?
Yeah, why is that really?
Yeah,
it's kind of like when you see people playing Zulu, you're like, oh, that's different.
Yeah, exactly. So all you have to do is not do that and just build terrain, like 6mm terrain, like old epic scale, or you can even use Titanic terrain. And instead of where your movement says you move, 4 hexes and run 6 hexes, you just change that to inches. So you literally just get a tape measure out and measure with a tape measure instead of counting hexes. And then when you turn facing, it's every hex face is 1 movement point or whatever, just like on the board game. You simply put your pointer finger behind your model, wherever that's at, and then turn the model and count as you turn. So if you want to move forward 2, and then turn 2, and then move forward another 2, you would simply measure 2 inches, move the model forward 2 inches, put your finger behind it, count 2 hex facings as you turn it to its new facing, then measure 2 inches again. It's pretty easy. Then when you shoot, you simply, if PPC or PPC shoots 23 hexes, you just measure 23 inches and shoot 23 inches. It's real simple. That's how we did the big game at War Games Camp, and I didn't even tell anyone. I would say half the people that played in that didn't even know that hexes are a thing in Battletech.
No.
And did you see anyone having a brain aneurysm trying to figure it out?
No, everyone had it figured out by like the second turn of the game. Yeah,
so it's pretty easy. You don't have to play that way. They actually put out an official release on how to play, quote-unquote, what they call miniature version of classic Battletech, and it's a 24-page PDF to basically explain what I just told you. So I just don't tell people to do that. I'm just like, hey, just measure in inches, directly transfer hexes to 1 inch, and whoever your little play group is, come to an understanding on, because there are area effect weapons, but they're actually fairly rare. We have been playing classic Battletech, me and Chris, with each other for roughly a year and a half, and we keep talking about getting templates made so that we can use area effect weapons, and we still haven't had them made, and it's never caused an issue. You can simply just put a die down where the munition lands and measure around it. You know what I mean? So, like, if an area of effect is, 1 hex takes X amount of damage, and then all surrounding hexes take whatever, and you're doing 1 hex equals 1 inch, that would just be a 1-inch blast marker with a 2-inch blast marker around it. So you could either have those made in acrylic, or you can just measure with a tape measure like we do, and just come to an agreement with your opponent on, quote-unquote, how big that explosion should be. It's pretty easy.
I don't know, so man. It sounds like fucking witchcraft for me.
Yeah, exactly. So it is kind of funny, like when we meet other people that play Classic, and then we'll talk about our games, and you can kind of see on their face, and we're like, oh yeah, we don't play with hexes. And then they'll look at you, and they're like, well, how do you manage to do that? And it's like, well, it's pretty easy. You just do this. And they're like, wow. Yeah, it's really weird. Like, they're still trapped in 1984, a lot of these, like, really grognardy Battletech people. So that's the other appeal to Alpha Strike is only miniature. You just measure with a tape. Like, Alpha Strike right from the rule book is there's no hexes. You just measure with the tape measure, all that. So that's the other reason a lot of people are super pro Alpha Strike and anti-Classic, is because they think that you have to play Classic on hexes. And I'm like, no, you basically can just take the movement, how Alpha Strike movement and facing and shit works, and just apply it to Classic and still play Classic, which is essentially what we do.
Yeah. Well, cool stuff. And yeah, lucky you remembered at the end there.
Yeah, that is important because I don't want people to look up classic Battletech and just see a bunch of, like I said, grognards sitting around with this weird poster with some hexes on it and think that's what you have to do.
It is weird, though, because the board game style is sort of in fashion at the moment.
Well, you can. That's the other nice thing. Like, even though I don't like that, per se, let's say... So, not that we did this, but let's say when you came over here to the United States, right? And let's say you come back next year and you want to visit. And you decide, I'm going to spend 4 weeks in America, and I want to come see Ryan for a little bit, but I also want to go to Yellowstone. And I'm like, hey, James, I want to go to Yellowstone too. Why don't you just fly over here, we'll hang out here a week, and we'll rent a fucking RV and drive to Yellowstone. We could simply get our significant others to drive said RV while we sit in the back and play Battletech. And it may not be, a whole fucking table worth of terrain along, but what we could do is put 2 classic hex-style map sheets there on the little coffee table in the back of the RV and play a game of Battletech, no problem. You know what I mean? So, in my opinion, it does still have its uses, and I would still do it that way. It's just, that's not, for me, the primary way that I like to play. I like to play on a 6x4 board, like you would play Titanicus or Warhammer or whatever on, with 6mm terrain where it looks really cool and thematic, and simply just measure in inches instead of hexes.
Yeah, I kind of like the idea of that Yellowstone trip now. Just, as long as I don't have to go near fucking Chicago. Fuck, I hate that place. Yeah.
So right now, I'm sending you pictures of some games of, this is classic Battletech that I've played on essentially a, miniatures scale map. Basically, like, I'm playing classic Battletech, but I'm playing it with 6mm terrain. If you want to use any of these as examples for the show, you can.
See what I work into it when I do the actual editing.
Okay. So that's actually it now. I don't have anything else. I'm glad I remembered that.
It's not going to haunt us afterwards. Like when you're thinking about like a song or something and you're like, oh fuck, it was just on the tip of my tongue. Oh fuck, what was it called? And then like 5 minutes after you walk away from the person you're talking to, you're like, oh fuck, that was it. So thanks very much for coming on. Do appreciate it.
No problem.
I am going to show off my 28mm scale catapult very soon that we 3D printed and painted up with Henry. I do have some photos of the other ones from the class as well. They're up on our Instagram. If people want to see that, you'll actually see, like, they're the size of knights from Warhammer 40k, but they cost like, what, $7 to print?
Yeah, I mean, material? In material they're about $7. I did put quite a bit of work into them. I think that the actual skill involved in making them look this way is relatively low. Like, if you can put together a Forge World kit and fix the fucking mold lines and patch some things on that, you can do this 3D printing stuff. Like I said, it takes a while. So I probably have after you take the mech off the machine and put it in, like, all the parts in a baggie, then whenever you get around to it, taking the parts out of the baggie, cleaning them, filling all the bad parts with putty, sanding them, priming them. I have about 20 hours in one mech doing that, which sounds like a lot, but I guess it just depends. Like, if I put together like a Knight or a Baneblade or a big GW kit, and I have to clean mold lines, and the way I do it, it doesn't take me really that much less time than it does to do one of these mechs.
Yeah, it's just.
I'm sure some people just clip them and glue them.
Oh, for sure. But it's not really that crazy amount of work we had to do. We just had to varnish up the windows and stuff to try and get it a bit smoother. Hit them with a filler paint that helps just fill in the printing, the stipulations from the printing, or striations. Sorry, stipulations. Fuck, I'm a moron. Fill in the striations from the 3D printing, and it's pretty good. Pretty good for what you pay and the actual investment of work into it. It's, oh boy, some other miniature companies are going to be,
and
people are going to be coming up.
And we talked about it in class, like we talked about in the class, on a model this size, having a few of those striations in there isn't bad, because actual real life, military vehicles and stuff have lines that look similar to that. They have casting lines and welding lines. There's actually like a putty you can get you buy a brand new plastic like Sherman model kit from Tamiya or whatever, and you literally put it on there and take a stippling paintbrush and stipple it on to make it look like how this thing will look like off of a 3D printer in a way.
Yeah, that's a legit thing. I've done it myself on scale models. You do it to make like the weld seams on the tanks and stuff. It's like a Tamiya model cement is the one I use, but each to their own. But yeah, it's exactly right what you said. So anyway, I'll wrap it up there. Just over an hour and a half, so pretty truncated, really, for the amount of information that had to be shared. Hopefully people are interested in it, and I do want to do more Battletech stuff in the future, because I did decide to back the Clan Invasion Kickstarter. Won't lie.
Sorry.
For those who are curious, it's Ryan's fault. I did the $95 pledge, the Star Captain, because I thought that was pretty good value, which Ryan did confirm. I didn't, however, decide to back the full Kerensky, because US $5,000 just wasn't doing it for me. But not that I couldn't, but my wife would murder me.
Level. I fell in between the full Kerensky and what James pledged, so I'll just say that. I'm fairly ashamed of the amount of money I spent on it.
I reckon you went for 2 Star Colonels or something? Maybe a Galaxy Commander?
What's the Star Colonel one?
The $300 pledge.
God damn it, you know me too well. That's exactly what I did. Was just doubled up on that one.
Fuck. That's funny.
I get that. Doubling up on that one nets me one. I'll get one of every sculpt that they released. I'll basically get one of everything, and then 2 of about half of the stuff they released. Basically the stuff that I wanted 2 of.
Yeah, that's just good value for money.
Yeah, that's the best. Monetarily, that was the best. Like, if you're just looking at the amount of models you get, that one was the best value to back on the Kickstarter. But even backing that, once you filled out all your pledge goals and picked all your packs, you wouldn't get everything. You'd be short on stuff. So I looked at doing them as add-ons, like just doing the Star Colonel and then buying the other ones as add-ons, and it added up to more than just doing Star Colonel twice. So I was like, well, I'll just do Star Colonel twice, and I actually get more shit than, doing the Star Colonel and whatever. The other cool thing about the Star Colonel one is you get to actually create a character that will be put into the Battletech fluff. So I'm actually going to do a character for Chris Duncan, who's like my best friend. So I'm giving him one of the characters. I don't know. I've kicked around the idea of doing one for myself.
Oop. Looks like Skype's playing up at this point in the recording. Have I got you back there, Brian? Well, that's going to cut us short. Well, anyway, thanks everyone who did watch the episode. We will come back with the rest of this conversation later on. Probably in the next episode. But thanks all for listening. And please, any messages you have or questions, leave them in the comments below.